this is how rulers rose, and how they fell. Dawn breaks over a crowded field ringed by ancient stones. A chill mist clings to the grass as farmers, fishermen, and rugged warriors gather in a great circle. Steel glints at every man's side. Swords and axes worn not for war today, but as symbols of the free people's power. In the center stands a weathered old law speaker atop a flat rock, his voice booming in the crisp air. He recites age-old laws from memory, a litany of rights and duties passed down through generations. A chieftain, face stern beneath his wolf fur cloak, raises a hand to speak, and the murmur of the crowd hushes. This is a Viking Thing, the sacred assembly of the people. Here, on this morning, the fate of leaders will be decided. Welcome to the Viking Thing and the birth of northern kingdoms, an epic tale of how humble assemblies of free folk shaped the rise of kings in the north, and how those very kings could be checked or even undone by the will of the people. Imagine the scene. At the Thing, the entire community is present. Weather-beaten farmers stand shoulder to shoulder with proud nobles and chieftains. The air is tense but electric with possibility. This isn't just a meeting. It's a drama, a public ritual of law and leadership. At a wooden platform or a large stone in the middle, the law rock, as it was called in Iceland, the law speaker calls for order. He has no scroll or book. All the laws live in his head, carved there by years of training and tradition. Today he wears a cloak of deep blue, the color that signifies wisdom, and as he speaks, every man listens. Because at the Thing, the law is not distant or abstract. It's alive, spoken aloud for all to hear, reminding everyone, from the poorest farmer to the mightiest jarl, of the rules that bind them together. The Viking Thing, from Old Norse thing, was the heart of governance in the Viking Age. It was more than a council. It was community theater, court, and parliament all in one. Here, disputes were settled through passionate argument instead of bloodshed. A man could step forward, accuse a neighbor or even a leader of wrongdoing, and have the case judged by his peers. Witnesses would swear oaths, standing before the crowd with one hand raised to solemnly speak truth. If a feuding pair could not resolve a quarrel, the Thing would judge between them, preventing an endless cycle of revenge killings. This public justice was a radical alternative in a culture where otherwise an eye for an eye might reign. In the assembly's hallowed circle, the blood feud gave way to law. Free men, not kings, made the decisions, and everyone, even the chiefs and would-be kings, had to respect what the Thing decreed. It's no wonder that later historians have called the Thing a Viking cradle of democracy, a place where power was shared among the community rather than hoarded by one ruler. Here, each man's voice could echo across the field, and sometimes a lone voice could shake the ambitions of a king. At a Thing, psychology and social dynamics were on full display. Picture the faces in the crowd, sun-leathered and stern, eager and anxious. The people trust this assembly because it's theirs. It's messy, it's loud, but it feels fair. Decisions aren't handed down by some distant throne. They're forged right here in the tension and noise of argument and consensus. Everyone can see the process unfolding, the evidence laid out, the community deliberating. This transparency binds their faith to the outcome. If the assembly decides you owe your neighbor a fine for trespassing, well, you had your chance to speak, and so did he. The verdict feels legitimate when it rises from the crowd's own murmur. There's a kind of psychological contract at work. We all agree to abide by what we've all had a say in. And so, even if you lose today, You return home knowing the decision was made in the open, under the wide sky, with the voices of your fellow Norsemen guiding it. In an age of saga and song, what happened at the Thing would be remembered in story and verse. Your reputation, your honor, could be affirmed or shattered here. Little wonder that the Thing site itself was sacred ground. Many assemblies met on sites that were already holy, near ancient oaks or at pagan temples, adding spiritual weight to these gatherings. The gods, it was believed, watched over the proceedings. Oaths sworn at the Thing were sworn not just in front of men, but before Thor and Odin as witnesses to your honor. Meanwhile, a wise ruler in the crowd would feel the knot in his stomach. Rulers feared the Thing even as they needed it. Why fear it? Because this assembly of commoners and nobles could challenge a king's authority in public. The one arena where even a king must answer to the law and to opinion. If a ruler pressed too hard, demanding new taxes perhaps, or breaking some cherished custom, it would be here that the backlash came, like a wave rising against the prow of a ship. A murmur of discontent in the crowd could swell into a roar of defiance. A king might find himself suddenly facing not a submissive populace, but a sea of angry freemen clanging their weapons against their shields in dissent. And if enough voices thundered, no, even a king's decree could be struck down. There are tales of proud rulers who stood on Thing fields and quailed as they realized the power flowing through those gathered around them. A power that wasn't in their royal blood or swords, but in the unity of the people. If you want to help me translate more stories like this, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. Let's delve deeper now because the saga of the Thing in the Northern Kingdoms is just beginning. It unfolds across generations. The transformation of Viking societies from loose networks of clans into centralized kingdoms with kings and crowns. And through it all, the Thing is the stage on which this drama plays out. To understand why these assemblies mattered so profoundly, we need to witness how they stood at the crossroads of change, sometimes slowing the march of central power, sometimes shaping it, and always remembering the values of the community. Travel back over 1,000 years to the rocky shores of Norway in the 9th century. The land is fragmented into dozens of petty kingdoms and chieftaincies. Fierce warlords rule over fjords and valleys, each with their own loyal fighters. In these early days, power is personal. A chieftain's might depends on the loyalty of his neighbors and kin, and that loyalty is often tested and reaffirmed at the Thing. Here a chieftain must stand among his people, not above them. He has to persuade them to sail on his raid, or support his claim, or join his feud. If he can't convince the assembly, he can't raise the men. It's as simple as that. This is a world where the voice of the free farmer carries weight. Perhaps not as much weight as a noble's, but enough that no lord can entirely ignore it. So even the mightiest jarls come to the Thing like everyone else. One man among many, trying to win the crowd's favor. Now, enter a young leader with an iron will and a wild mane of hair. Harald Fairhair. According to saga legend, Harald was a minor king of a small realm in coastal Norway who dared to dream big. How big? All of Norway big. But to us, decades and centuries later, what's fascinating is why he wanted it. The story goes that Harald fell in love with a proud princess, Gyda, who laughed at his proposal of marriage. "I'll not have a petty lord for my husband," Gyda declared, or so the tale is told. She challenged him to make himself king of the whole country if he wanted her hand. Harald, young and brash, took her words to heart. He stood up before his men, perhaps even at a local Thing, and swore a bizarre oath. He would not cut or comb his hair until he had united all Norway under his rule. You can imagine the gasps and chuckles at that proclamation. To the rugged Norseman listening, it must have sounded like madness or divine destiny. Or both. But Harold meant it. He launched into years of warfare, forging alliances and crushing rivals. Battle by battle, fjord by fjord, he earned the right to that name, Fairhair. In fact, for much of his quest he was known as Harald Tanglehair, because his golden locks grew long and unkempt while he fought. Only after the final victory, when Norway bowed to one king, did he finally shear his hair and emerge as Harald Fairhair, first king of a unified Norway. The saga says it took him 10 years of struggle to fulfill his oath. Gyda, impressed, and perhaps a bit shocked he actually did it, became his queen. It's a romantic tale, certainly embellished by storytellers, but behind it lies a real historical shift. The unification of Norway into a single kingdom for the first time, around the late 9th century. Why does Harold's story matter for the Thing? Because Harold's rise didn't happen in a vacuum. It sparked a political revolution. Up to this point, Norway's power structure was diffuse. Harold's push to dominate meant many old chieftains had to either submit, die, or flee. And many chose to flee. Whole families of proud landowners and warriors, unwilling to live under a king's new taxes and commands, packed their goods into ships and sailed west. Some went to the Scottish Isles, some to Ireland or Orkney. And a great many of them went to a remote wild island that had only recently been discovered by Vikings. Iceland. The sagas say that Harald Fairhair's tyranny, as later Icelandic writers would call it, drove these fiercely independent people to seek a new life where no king could reach them. Whether or not Harold was truly a tyrant or just an ambitious monarch, the effect was the same. In the 870s and 880s, ships bearing men, women, children, and livestock left Norway's fjords behind and made the perilous journey to Iceland's shores. There, in that land of fire and ice, they built a society from scratch, one that pointedly had no kings at all. Now picture a sunny summer day in the year 930 on a broad plain in southwest Iceland. Thousands of settlers have trekked for days from their farms, converging on a place called Thingvellir, the Assembly Plains. It's a dramatic landscape. A great rift valley with cliffs and a broad expanse of green cut through by a sparkling river. Here under the open sky, these Norse refugees do something revolutionary. They found a national assembly, the Althing. Imagine that moment. Hardened frontiersmen and proud chieftains stand together as one man. An early leader named Ulfljótur, as the story goes, recites a code of laws he had brought from Norway's Gulathing, adapted for this new land. They set up a law rock at Thingvellir, where each year a law speaker would recite the laws, just as in the old country. But unlike Norway, there is no king's throne looming in the background. Power in Iceland is deliberately decentralized. Some 36 prominent chieftains, known as Godar, each lead local things and come together at the Althing each summer. Here they resolve disputes, make laws, and manage the island's affairs collectively. It is, for the 10th century, an astonishing experiment in self-governance. One contemporary writer called it a self-limiting pattern of state formation. In other words, the settlers of Iceland intentionally chose not to create a king or a state, but to stick with the old assembly system as the highest authority. Every farmer was the thingman, follower of some chieftain. But those chieftains were not monarchs. They were more like community leaders, and farmers could even choose and switch their allegiance among them. The Icelanders believed no single person should ever rule over all. Better to meet and hash things out in debate than bow to a crown. In essence, they carried the thing culture of Scandinavia to its logical extreme. A whole country run as one big thing. Of course, even in Iceland, not everything was idyllic. Feuds still happen, and how? They'd fill entire sagas with their violence. But the Althing was the glue that held the Icelandic Commonwealth together for over 3 centuries. It was here, at Thingvellir, that famous sagas reached their climax in legal showdowns rather than pitched battles. Picture a saga scene. 2 bitter rivals, after seasons of bloodshed, finally face each other before the law rock with the whole nation watching. One has to pay hefty fines or face outlawry, which in effect is a death sentence. An outlaw can be killed by anyone. The other perhaps must accept weregild, blood money, instead of vengeance. These were the kinds of outcomes that, elsewhere, might have been decided by a king or by endless revenge. In Iceland, they were decided by assemblies of peers. The spirit of the thing lived on in its purest form in that North Atlantic frontier. But what of the lands the settlers left behind? Back in Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, the late 900s and early 1000s were an era of kings rising and kings falling, often at the things. Harald Fairhair's descendants and successors found that ruling a kingdom as proud and unruly as Norway was no easy task. One of Harald's sons, Hakon the Good, earned his name by working with his people rather than against them. Hakon had been raised in England as a Christian, and when he became king, he carefully tried to introduce his new faith to Norway. But the old pagan ways were deeply cherished, and Hakon discovered that the thing was where his kingly ambitions would meet the firm resistance of tradition. The saga of Hakon the Good gives a vivid account of a confrontation at a Yuletide feast. Picture a grand hall in midwinter, filled with the smoke of torches and the smell of roasting meat. King Hakon, a Christian in a pagan land, sits at the high seat as the Yule banquet begins. One by one, the pagan chieftains stand to make toasts. First to Odin, for victory and the king's might, then to Njord and Freyr, for peace and good harvest. Horns of ale are drained in honor of the old gods. Hakon's turn comes. The room falls silent, all eyes on the king. They know he worships the White Christ now, not the gods of Asgard. The expectation, however, is clear. The king must partake in the rituals or he risks angering the gods, and more immediately, angering his subjects. Hakon lifts the horn. Perhaps his hand trembles slightly. In his heart he prays to his own god, but he knows he cannot show it. To Odin, he says without actually naming the god, and drinks. A tense murmur passes through the hall. The farmers are not fully satisfied. Later in the feast, they bring out horse meat, sacred to the god Freyr, and urge Hakon to eat. The king recoils. To a Christian, eating horse, especially sacrificed horse, is abhorrent. His refusal is met with dark scowls. Men mutter that if the king won't support the gods, why should the gods support the king? The atmosphere turns menacing. In a flash, Hakon is facing a potential revolt right there in the feast hall. Some of the tipsy, angry farmers even threaten violence. Swords scrape out of scabbards. Hakon's royal guard tenses, hands on hilts. It's a standoff of faith and custom. Finally, one of the king's loyal jarls, a pragmatic man, desperately intervenes to save the situation. He pleads with Hakon, just this once, perform the rituals, if not sincerely, at least to placate the crowd. Under pressure, Hakon concedes. He grimaces and chokes down a few bites of horse liver, and he lifts the mead horn in a pagan salute, without making the sign of the cross over it. The tension ebbs. Disaster is averted. For the moment. The following year the game repeats. Another Yule, another confrontation. This time Hakon barely escapes the feast without being attacked by his own subjects, and only by agreeing to participate in a full pagan sacrifice do they let him be. These dramatic episodes show a king learning a hard truth. He may be lord by title, but when he's outnumbered by his people at their assembly and holy feasts, he must bend or break. The Thing, whether in the feast hall or the formal field, speaks with the voice of the many, and even a king ignores that voice at his peril. What's remarkable is how these assemblies could both empower and restrain rulers. Ambitious leaders like Harold Fairhair and his descendants used things to legitimize their rule. They would attend the regional things, such as the Gulating on the west coast of Norway, which King Harold is believed to have established around 900 CE as a grand assembly for his new domain. There, the king could proclaim new laws or settle disputes with the appearance of broad support. It was wise to do so. If the king could say, "This law was approved at the Gulating," it carried the weight of collective consent, not just royal decree. In Denmark, likewise, kings like Harald Bluetooth likely gathered leading men at things to announce major changes. Harold's famous Jellingstone boasts that he made the Danes Christian and united the realm. But behind that proclamation, we can imagine councils and assemblies where he secured buy-in for the new faith, or at least quashed opposition. In Sweden, the law dictated that no king was truly king until the Thing of all Swedes at Uppsala had acknowledged him, an elected monarchy of sorts. Indeed, a king who displeased the Swedish Thing could pay the ultimate price. There's a legendary tale of King Domalde in ancient times. When crop failures brought famine year after year, the Swedes grew convinced their king's luck had soured the land. In the third grim harvest, the chiefs called an assembly at the great temple of Uppsala. Amid the gold icons of the gods and the smell of blood from desperate sacrifices, they took a dreadful vote. King Domalde himself must be offered to the gods to save the realm. And so Domalde was seized, sacrificed, and his blood was sprinkled on the idols so that good seasons would return. This chilling story, told by Snorri Sturluson in his Ynglinga saga, might be myth, but it held a lesson that even real kings remembered. A ruler serves at the pleasure of his people and the gods, and if he fails disastrously, the assembly may quite literally decide to kill the king for the good of the kingdom. The luck of the king is the luck of the land, Snorri wrote, and if the land is starving, the king's life might be forfeit. By the start of the 11th century, the political landscape of the North was transforming. Christianity swept through Scandinavia, propelled by kings who saw in the new faith a pathway to stronger royal authority and unity with Europe. Kings like Olaf Tryggvason and Olaf Haraldsson, Saint Olaf in Norway, Olaf Skotkonung in Sweden, and Harald Bluetooth in Denmark embraced the cross, and with it, a more centralized kind of kingship. Christianity brought the written word. Suddenly laws that had been oral for centuries were written in books, and the church's hierarchy introduced new concepts of authority. Yet even as these monarchs consolidated power, they still had to respect the old institutions to some degree. Olaf Tryggvason, for example, was a charismatic and forceful king who converted Norsemen by the sword where persuasion failed. But he too convened things to announce his decrees and ensure at least a show of consent from the lords. The Thing was where legitimacy was conferred. Without it, a king was just a warlord claiming a title. With it, he could say he was chosen by the people or accepted by the law. In Sweden, a famous confrontation occurred between King Olaf Skotkonung and his own law speaker, Torni. As Snorri relates, King Olaf stubbornly refused to make peace with the King of Norway or give his daughter in marriage to him, threatening endless war. Frustrated, the Swedish nobles took the matter to the Thing, and old Torni stood up before King Olaf and the assembly. In a speech that has echoed through ages, he reminded Olaf that his own great-grandfather was deposed for angering the people, as was his grandfather, warning that the will of the people could unmake kings as readily as it made them. In Sweden, declared Torni, the people rule, not the king. One imagines Olaf's face reddening as murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd of free peasants and nobles. The mighty king was being publicly dressed down by a commoner speaking for the masses. And Olaf, seeing the writing on the wall, had no choice but to swallow his pride and relent to the assembly's demands. He made peace and avoided a rebellion. Stories like this, even if polished by legend, carried a clear message. A Nordic king who tried to overrule the Thing risked losing his throne or his life. As the Viking Age waned, the balance of power did tilt increasingly toward the monarchs. The introduction of feudal structures, the support of the church for divinely sanctioned kingship, and the slow economic changes gave the kings more leverage. By the 11th and 12th centuries, we see the first rudiments of formal king's councils and nascent parliaments dominated by nobles rather than all free men. In Iceland, the proud commonwealth eventually weakened. Internal conflicts, famously chronicled in sagas, and pressure from Norway led to Iceland's submission to the Norwegian crown in 1262, ending its era of stateless governance. Yet, the spirit of the Thing was never snuffed out. In fact, one could argue that the Viking Thing sowed the seeds for the very idea of constitutional rule in Northern Europe. The concept that the law is a cooperative agreement, that leaders must answer to some assembly of their people, survived the medieval kings. Through the Middle Ages, Scandinavian kings often governed in concert with assemblies of nobles and clergy, and sometimes commoners. By the early modern era, those assemblies evolved into the parliaments of Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. Even their names carried the echo of the ancient things. The Norwegian parliament today is the Storting, which literally means great thing. And in Iceland, the national legislature still proudly calls itself the Althing. The Faroe Islands have their Løgting, one of the oldest parliaments in the world. In the British Isle of Man, once a Viking domain, the parliament is Tynwald, Thingvellir in Norse, and they still gather annually on a grassy hill as if recapturing a memory of Viking assemblies past. A modern Scandinavian visiting a regional council meeting, with local representatives debating budgets and laws, might not realize it. But they are part of a tradition, stretching right back to those misty dawn gatherings around a law speaker in a circle of armed freemen. As one historian noted, the legalistic, community-centered mindset of the old things left a lasting imprint on how governance in Scandinavia developed. Even kings, no matter how autocratic, had to be mindful of the law of the land, a concept dear to the hearts of their people, rooted in Thing practice. Let's return, then, to that dawn image where we began, our mental painting of a Viking Thing at daybreak. The law speaker has finished reciting the laws. Now a new matter is at hand. Say, a proposed expedition across the sea, or perhaps the judgment of a powerful man accused of wrong. A murmur sweeps through the crowd as the accused, a burly landowner, steps forward, flanked by supporters. Opposite him, the accuser stands with head unbowed, a simple farmer seeking justice for some grievance. The chieftain presiding raises his hand, and the crowd stills, awaiting the decision. Here in this charged silence lies the essence of Viking politics. Not the whim of one ruler, but the collective judgment of the community. The outcome might shape the fate of a local leader, or determine whether a king's decree is accepted. In this moment, rulers tremble, and common men find their courage. How many rulers rose at such gatherings, buoyed by the acclaim of their peers and the consent of their people? How many rulers fell, shouted down or quietly undermined by those they thought they ruled? We have seen some rise. Harold carving out a kingdom with oath and sword, endorsed by things that gradually came under his sway. And we have seen some fall. Domalde on the altar, a victim of failing fortune and a collective will to survive at any cost. The Viking Thing may seem like a relic of a distant pagan past, but its legacy is very much alive. It lived on in the assemblies that check kings, and eventually in the parliaments that represent people to this day. It contributed to an enduring Northern European idea that rulership is a contract, not merely a divine right. The people give power, and the people can take it away. In that sense, every time a prime minister stands before a legislature to be held accountable, or a law is debated openly with representatives from different regions, we are hearing faint echoes of those Viking ancestors, arguing in the morning mist about rights and laws, insisting that their voices be heard. As our story ends, consider the transformation we've witnessed. In the Viking Age, a rough-hewn assembly of axe-bearing farmers could defy a king. Over centuries, those gatherings evolved. Kings were tempered by councils, and eventually the principles of collective decision-making flourished in new forms. The northern kingdoms were born out of a delicate dance between bold rulers and the assemblies that legitimized or limited them. From clan chiefs to kings, from pagan rites to Christian law, from oral tradition to written codes, the journey was epic. Yet through it all, the fundamental scene remained, people gathering to govern themselves, however imperfectly. The Viking Thing was both an agent of change and a preserver of ancestral rights. It ensured that the birth of kingdoms in the north would not be a simple tale of conquest, but a complex saga of negotiation between the one and the many. And so, as the last image, see a medieval king riding away from a thing mound, the cheers or jeers of his subjects lingering in his ears. He knows that though he wears the crown, the soul of the kingdom lives in those assemblies, in the hearts of the people. This awareness will pass down through the ages, long after the Viking longships have vanished from the seas. How rulers rose, and how they fell, has always depended on that bond with their people. It's a lesson etched into Northern history by the sharp voices and even sharper swords of the Viking Thing. I'll be here again with another story of how rulers rose and how they fell.